Welcome to Section 4, Adjusting to the News of Divorce. So what can individuals do to adjust to the sudden news or not so news of divorce? And in this section, we're also going to we're going to talk about the dynamics of what happens that perpetuates conflict from the marriage through the divorce process and then the post-divorce process. All right, let's look at some research on resiliency by Greff and van der Merwe in 2004, and they've written about 7 resiliency factors which contribute to the stability for individuals and families after divorce. And one should ensure that these areas are identified and then bolstered as to how to cope with your divorce early on and even later, which will impact your parenting and co-parenting, because the better you each do through the process, the better the family is going to be, the more easily the family will be stabilized post-divorce. So let's look at some of these factors. So intra-family support. So this is really support within the nuclear family. How bonded is everyone? How close are the children to? How close are the parents to the children? Number 2, going around the wheel as a clock, family support. So support from the extended family. Certainly, it's important to have grandparents, uncles, and aunts. It becomes more difficult when families are separated by distance. Support of friends. It's really important to have a strong family network. As I've said before, sometimes this is related to some of the in-laws too, and sometimes these relationships are maintained, sometimes not. But the more friends, the stronger the couple is and family is set within the community, the better they do. And spirituality or faith, so belief in a higher power or engaged in a spiritual group. So again, just being part of a larger community, so there's more resources to pull from. Financial security, so financial and work security. So especially if so many families come from traditional families, or even unfortunately, based on the research, the research still indicates that even when both parents work, the wife still had the lion's share of parental responsibility, parenting care, but that's not always the case. But this is a resiliency factor when the woman or the wife is financially secure. Because, certainly in a divorce, often the husband has been the breadwinner and typically makes more money, so the wife may be in a stay-at-home mom too, and she could potentially have a lot of anxiety about wondering how she's going to pay for the bills, and even understanding how to manage money. Maybe she never had to worry about that before. And then alternative support resources like neighbors, schools, and churches. So again, another resiliency factor. Again, a lot of these are relate to community and community support. And then the 7th one is family hardiness. And really this is just how resilient, how has this family handled crises in the past, or are they pretty adaptive? Are the members psychologically fit within the family? So those are the seven resiliency factors that you want to bolster if you are going through any type of divorce. So there are other factors that we know about with divorce and gender that you should know about too. So women typically, I'm going to move to the next slide. Women typically turn to family and friends for support, whereas men typically turn to other women. And we know this too based on just the length of time it usually takes for men and women to remarry. So men are usually remarried within 2 to 3 years, and women usually 3 to 5 years. Divorce workshops have been found to improve resiliency after divorce. So something like this or the parent stabilization course certainly assists people in the process of divorce, probably by normalizing the experience as well as teaching people new skills. And then further, forgiveness is imperative. Forgiveness is not forgetting what happened, but letting the hurt go. Forgiveness decreases rumination and provides people with a new way to think about their circumstances. Imagine, if before forgiveness you're still ruminating and thinking over and over again and trying to retaliate about this person and worrying about how you're going to act and respond, and there's just so much freedom in letting that go, especially if you know you're not going to be together again. And then finally, those that take responsibility for their new life will be more resilient. And those that take more responsibility, they do better. And those people that get divorced, they often become even closer to family and friends in comparison to how they were in their relationship. So they reach back out to family and friends reach back out to them and really build new relationships. So you have close friends again. So very powerful. The objective then is to maintain this too when you start getting reattached in future relationships. So, I recommend people they need to throw themselves back into their family and friends. But the challenge is finding other people that are now divorced as well, or that have time, because it can be depressing, as you know, when certainly the holidays, when everybody's with their families and you are single, but hopefully you have friends that will invite you to be with them, and you will feel comfortable enough to be with them. All right, let's talk about managing emotions and conflict. So here's where we begin to really get to the answers, and I'm going to get less educational about things. So after this section, you should understand the following: that each parent will experience grief differently, and will experience grief differently during and after the separation, which certainly can lead to conflict. And becoming disengaged emotionally from the other parent is the goal. So the goal is to become disengaged emotionally. And you can reduce conflict by changing your approach and being less engaged. And separation is difficult regardless of who initiated it, and each will have to deal with it separately. You are no longer together. So you got to remember that. All right, so managing emotions and conflict. As discussed in the last section, there are several models regarding how the process of divorce plays out and how it is grieved. The models reviewed likely all have something to offer and do co-occur. No two individuals are alike, and no divorce is alike. So everyone grieves, processes, and acts differently. Comparing divorce and the grief of divorce to the classical grief model is helpful, but again, with divorce, the loved one remains alive, and the idea of getting back together for the one left often remains. Okay, so that's the challenge. Person has died. The person that you've known has died, yet they are still there. Experiencing divorce differently, Mike and Joan. I am going to tell you a story about Mike and Joan, and they are a couple that has been created, although they certainly reflect numerous couples that I've seen clinically. And then we're going to refer back to the slide that talks about the cycle of what occurs. So when there's certain expectations in the marriage, and how the partners break up, to how they try to change the other, and how they both react, and how the cycle continues that really started during the marriage, through the divorce process, and then post-divorce, that then just leads to perpetual conflict. All right. So let's talk about Joan and Mike. So I do have to warn you, you're going to be listening a lot, and this is the last slide in this section. Joan has been contemplating divorce for many months, but she is anxious about the impact this will have, meaning divorce, will have for her 2 children and her husband, Mike. After growing closer to Peter, a friend at work, Joan had an affair with Peter, which Mike quickly discovered after finding suspicious texts on Joan's phone. Prior to the discovery, Joan was certain she wanted to end her marriage. However, after the discovery, she experienced intense guilt and emotion and blamed herself for causing the end of the marriage, and then felt unsure at times about whether to leave or not. Mike can't seem to forgive her, and even though Joan wanted to end the marriage, it is still upsetting that Mike will not acknowledge that they've had serious problems for years. She gets angry at times when she has to defend her position about what she was certain about. Mike is angry too and won't stop blaming her for not having talked to him about her unhappiness and having an affair instead. Joan just wants to end it. She does not want to go to couples therapy to fix it. She knows it is over, the more they can't seem to reconcile how the last few years have been. She asks Mike to work with her to develop the best possible parenting plan for the kids. Mike remains furious. Joan does not understand why he just won't get over it because he was so unhappy too. She is ready to split up the property and begin her life apart from Mike. Mike, still devastated, enters therapy himself. After a couple of months of individual therapy, Mike sees there were problems and acknowledges that Joan had complained about her unhappiness with him for the last couple of years. But he never imagined that she would have an affair. When Mike discovered the affair, he felt so betrayed and angry and thought he could never get over an affair. However, now, Mike wants to maintain the family unit and win his wife back, despite their past unhappiness. He does not think the children deserve to have divorced parents. Mike believes that if Joan would just realize how hard this will be for everyone, she will consider reconciling. But she only seems to care about herself and being independent, according to Mike. Mike is overwhelmed with sadness and loneliness, while Joan still wants to finalize the divorce, all which, again, makes Mike very angry. He never asked for this, and now, because Joan wants freedom, he has to lose everything like his home, time with his kids, and his dreams. He feels this is all just not fair. Despite their different positions, both are feeling similar emotions of sadness and anger. Both can see a way to have a positive relationship with the other parent. For Joan, if Mike would just acquiesce and let her go, she is happy to split everything, including time sharing, while Mike just wants Joan to realize how she has hurt him, apologize, and work on their relationship. The bottom line is that each parent believes the other must do something different to resolve the situation. The cycle has now begun. As Mike and Joan interact, they both begin trying to make the other person change their behavior and expect that the other's behavior will change. During this process, both experience hurt, betrayal, misunderstanding, and guilt, yet both continue to try to change the other. Then they are hurt, then they're each hurt and mad as one does not want to be controlled and the other reacts when the person does not act as they wish. This dynamic happens again and again and then continues during the post-divorce process as they continue to remain at odds. Mike's resentments toward Joan are never resolved, and Joan believes that Mike continues to control her as he did in the marriage and through the divorce process. Now they absolutely can't stand the other. Let's move away from Joan and Mike, who were married for several years. Know that even very short relationships in marriage that do involve children often at least involve one parent that is deeply hurt. And deeply hurt about how the parents co-parent each other. Or co-parent with each other. Often there is so much conflict that one parent or both wish the other would just relinquish their contact with the children. What you are now seeing and probably realizing, if you do not know already, that most often co-parenting conflict is caused by two people experiencing the separation differently and not appreciating the other's emotional and perceptual experiences. This is often how conflict is initiated, followed by failed attempts to change the other, the reactions to being controlled, and then reactions related to the behavior not being changed regarding the one trying to control and the one being controlled. When there is conflict, at least one is attempting to control, fix, or change the other parent. Often it seems like the parents are still married and locked in an intimate relationship based on the emotions, although negative, elicited by the other. Again, the root cause is usually concerns both parents wanting the other parent to appreciate and understand their position and their thoughts and feelings about it, coupled with the belief that if the other parent would be reasonable and see things their way, that the other parent would fully understand and follow suit. Importantly, remember that if you were married and you could not get the other parent to behave or think differently in divorce, you are certainly not going to be able to control the other person now. Your influence has been greatly diminished in divorce. And what often comes next is the using of the children, okay? Now to influence the other parent's behavior. This is absolutely the wrong approach. And it is impossible for them to see things your way if you are now using the children as leverage. This tactic is often out of awareness of the person doing it. If you want to stop the madness, then stop trying to change the other's perceptions and behavior, and especially quit reacting and being surprised when they don't see things the same way as you. I find people spend so much time arguing about what is fair. As a psychologist, I know that fairness is often a distorted style of thinking. Fairness is a fallacy. No one in the world sees any event exactly the same way. Let's just say that each person's sense of fairness is fair to them and to them alone, so please quit arguing about what is fair. Let's talk more about this slide too, and I have on the upper right, the abandoned and the abandoner. So the abandoned, right, the one that's left, and the abandoner is the one that is leaving. The experience of the abandoner and the abandoned is very different. Psychological studies have found that the abandoner's primary emotion is guilt, which is often experienced as sadness because the abandoner usually does love the abandoned but feels strongly justified in leaving their marriage and the abandoned. The guilt and sadness of the abandoner leads to anger and hostility at times toward the abandoned when the abandoned denies the reality of their problems or tries to force the other to remain in the relationship. However, the abandoner still experiences loss and sadness, often due to the physical deprivation of the relationship in addition to the loss of the bond and the good parts of the relationship that end as well. The abandoned's primary emotion is often sadness due to rejection. They experience sadness because of their sense of love for the other person being unreciprocated. This further causes the abandoned additional emotional hurt and pain, and then in turn leads to anger when mixed with their primary emotion of rejection. The abandoned's primary emotion is often sadness due to rejection. They experience sadness because of their sense of love for the other person being unreciprocated. This further causes the abandoned additional emotional hurt and pain, and in turn leads to anger when mixed with their primary emotion of rejection. Often sustained, these underlying emotions of sadness remain until the loss is processed and a new life begins to emerge. Remember, conflict is the result of the parent's attempts to change the other parent's behavior or thinking. This dynamic likely played out in the marriage, will play out in the divorce process, and then will continue to play out post-divorce if not addressed. People no longer married should not expect to still influence their former spouse, yet it continues to happen, often if mutual acceptance is not reached. I have a conflict alert here. Not what you think it is. However, it's related to you, likely. Do you know that conflict is a sign that you both continue to harbor strong feelings for each other? Psychologists consider conflict to be a form of emotional intimacy. So, if you're having conflict, it's likely that you are too intimate in some way with your former partner. I want you to imagine a continuum that begins with most intimate to friendship in the middle to at the other end disengaged and disinterested. When we're looking at a most intimate relationship, the emotions that come to mind or come to play are either love or hate. In the middle is friendship, certainly more neutralized, more balanced emotions. And then on the other end, we're the least intimate, so the people you don't have relationships with, where there's no emotional contact, that's the disengaged and people that you're disengaged from and disinterested. And our target here is certainly to be between friendship and least intimate with our former partner, to be, disengaged, disinterested, but also engaged enough to communicate still about the children, but not to be emotionally engaged. Parents sharing a child and who have been emotionally intimate often have a highly emotional reaction to the other. These emotions may be positive and or negative. Both emotions of love and hate are signs of past and or current involvement. Know that when parent A is impacted emotionally by parent B, that is a sign there is less emotional involvement or emotional investment for parent A, and hopefully parent B as well. When there is no conflict, the parents are either disengaged or disinterested emotionally. Now, having a case example here. One of my most volatile cases was a young couple I saw for parenting coordination. And this couple, they vacillated. They had a couple kids themselves together, and they were now divorced. But when I would meet with them, they would vacillate from such extreme positions of cooperation and hate that I was certain there was more to the story. Even though they just still seem attached in some way, that based on the volatility and the extreme nature of how they would treat each other. So both had been remarried and had new children with their respective spouses. And years later after I concluded my work with the couple, I had discovered that they had continued to be sexually active despite both having remarried other partners and both having additional children with their new partners. So I was certainly not surprised that this occurred. So although this example is an extreme one, it is probably making sense now that emotionally disengaged parents find it much easier to be cooperative with the other. No longer are they upset about the other's private life or who is the superior parent. Thus, the goals for reducing conflict is then for you to become less emotionally engaged with the other parent and to allow them to be less engaged with you. You will see that as you become less engaged, you will no longer sink back into the black hole of conflict. What they say and whether there is intent to hurt you no longer has staying power. So, what I want you to do, I want you to refer back to the slide, and I want you just to spend some time in looking at how the cycle works. So, here through the divorce process, and in the marriage, there's an expectation that the other parent will change their behavior. So, if one person has left and one remains, or one still wants the relationship, or even if both wanted this to end, there's still hurt, betrayal, misunderstanding, and guilt. There's attempts to change the other, and then there's a negative reaction about trying to be controlled. And the cycle continues. And I'm not going to go through the other aspects of the slide because I've already been through. I did discuss this by providing all of that material already. So you can take some moments, and I want you just to reflect upon how you can change this cycle today. What is your role? And how can you change it today? And if you don't know, we'll find out in the next sections.